for this newer technology. So looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. Again, we're a Microsoft partner. If there's anything you guys ever need any help with, or you want to do workshops or any efforts that we could help you out with, definitely reach out. We're always looking to help out our clients. So after that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right, good morning, everyone. As Matt said, we're the Garys. We're going to kind of co-present this today, and we're going to talk about, scripting and specifically using Semantic Link and Semantic Link Labs. We'll talk about what that is here in a moment. The idea here is to spend a little time kind of introducing you to the concepts, talk about some of what's possible, and then jump into some demos, kind of showing some of this stuff off. This has become really kind of we've run into this a lot lately. I mean, I already heard a few of you talking here as we came in about just trying to get some you kind of get your arms around these kind of burgeoning Power BI / Fabric environments. We see that a lot in the local market right now. We're being called in to help clients either kind of manage the transition to Fabric, and just as Power BI now, and Power BI has been around now for 8, 9, 10 years almost, I think. And we see the adoption's really has really taken off, and so I think we see in a lot of organizations where it's kind of started small. You've given some people licenses, you've got different business analysts and groups kind of starting to build content, and then kind of before you know it, you've got workspaces, and it just kind of mushrooms. And then on the IT side, somebody says, hey, why are there so many workspaces, or trying to figure out kind of where all this data is and trying to bring some organization and some management to it kind of after the fact. So some of what we're going to talk about today is how we use some of these tools to help, just kind of maybe inventory and kind of keep track of, and then maybe automate or kind of streamline some of this processing. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary. Again, he's going to run through a few slides here. I'm just going to kind of provide some commentary along the way. We've got a small group here today. It sounds like we've got some varying degrees of experience. And just maybe before we get started, has anyone, first of all, has anyone started to use or familiar with Semantic Link and Semantic Link Labs? Any familiarity? Okay. How about just anybody done any scripting around some of the Power BI APIs and kind of automate, try to do a little bit something that way? Because as we'll talk about here in a moment, these are kind of an evolution or kind of a wrapper around a lot of what's available up in the Power BI, kind of the REST APIs, and kind of takes it to another level in some cases. Okay, so I was just kind of curious, kind of where people may be at. So it's good to kind of level set there. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary, and we're going to again kind of walk through a handful of these slides, and then we'll get into some demo and show some of this stuff off. But I was going to say, again, small group, so just blurt out questions. You don't need to raise your hand, or I'd rather turn this into a bit more of a conversation. So if anything's not clear, if you have a question about what we're talking about, if we just lose our, oh no, there it goes. Okay. Can we get rid of that thing?
What is that? Why is that displaying?
I don't know how can I get my mouse over there sometime? Just a second. That was kind of annoying. Oh, really? Well, it's still, I'd like to. Now we're sharing the wrong screen.
I think you go back to Teams probably.
I'm going to stop sharing that.
We still have to. Again.
How to get that thing? I can't even get a mouse over there to do it though.
goes down.
Let's see. Ah, good call. I did.
Yeah. Good call.
All right.
Hi. Okay. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Polinsky. Excited to more into the microphone. Okay.
Microphone's going to be there.
Or the microphone's on the
I think
laptop.
it's on the laptop.
Okay. Is that better? Can you hear me? Apparently. Oh, Gary's got such a big, the other Gary's got such a big, bold voice. You weren't having trouble hearing him? Let me get a little closer. Let me get right in front of him. How's that? Better? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Polinsky. I'm excited to be here to talk to you about Semantic Link and Semantic Link Labs. These are a couple, like Gary mentioned, these are a couple of tools that are designed to simplify and enhance your work in Power BI and Microsoft Fabric. A little bit about, we didn't really get an introduction, but I wanted to just kind of tell you about our host, Gary Bell here, who is a data analytics architect at Covenant, technology partner with over 20 years of experience, and truly an expert in data warehousing and engineering, and has guided clients across many industries and building out all sorts of different solutions. So I'm excited to be to work with Gary. So together we're going to walk through how these tools provide access to the Power BI semantic models and advanced automation, performance tuning, and management tools. So let's dive in. So we'll be covering, we'll start with an introduction to Semantic Links and Semantic Link Labs, giving you an understanding of what these tools are, kind of how they relate to Power BI and Microsoft Fabric, what they matter in modern data analytics workflow. And we'll talk through some of the key features that make these tools really powerful, including how they enable like Gary was mentioning, metadata access, automation, and integration across your reporting ecosystem. And then we'll bring it all together with a couple of demos. I'll start off with a demo that's kind of a level 100, because that'll kind of give us an introduction to the functions, and then Gary will take a deeper dive with a demo that brings together a variety of these functions and in a more robust solutions for different use cases. So what are these tools? Well, there really are aids for Power BI administrators and developers. They give you programmatic access to Fabric items, including semantic models, reports. They allow you to automate tasks, inspect and manipulate metadata, and kind of streamline everything from report management to model optimization. And these are things that would normally, take a lot of effort. It would require maybe some complex code or working across different interfaces, and this really kind of helps to simplify that whole process.
So this is it is just going to be somewhat code heavy in that it's we call this scripting, but it's actually we're writing Python code to interact with these libraries that we're talking about, Semantic Link and Semantic Link Labs. Has anybody done any Python? A little Python? That's great. The upside here is that from a Python perspective, I think you'll find this to be pretty dead simple Python code. And what the Semantic Link libraries allow you to do is it really streamlines the process of interacting with a lot of these functions. I mentioned the APIs that Power BI makes available. The Link Labs particularly is kind of a wrapper around a lot of those APIs. So I do want to warn you that it is code in that you're writing Python. However, I don't think you think you're going to find it's not too intimidating from a code perspective. And the other thing to mention and I'm sure a lot of you started to work more and more with Copilot and ChatGPT. I'm not a Python coder by any means, but ChatGPT allows me to kind of play one on TV, right? I mean, I can ask it to write Python code for me. In fact, I even can, I'll point it to say specifically use the Semantic Link Labs library to do this, this, and this, and ChatGPT or Copilot will pump out some Python code. And Python, for those of you that have worked with it, is, I think, intuitive enough that it's not super obtuse in terms of you can kind of read through it and understand for the most part what's going on. So again, we'll get into some demo and show some of what this looks like, but just a heads up that this is Python code that we're going to be kind of interacting with and writing in order to take advantage of this.
Yeah, and some of this code is for some of the, specifically the semantic links, is really geared towards data science applications, and the Semantic Link Labs is geared more towards Power BI admins and developers. So given the audience here, we're going to focus more on the Semantic Link Labs, so that we cover what's relevant to you all. Just a quick comparison. Semantic Link Labs is the official Microsoft supported framework for data model data communication.
Semantic Link.
Semantic Link,
We've
what did
got,
I say?
yeah, labs.
Labs. Okay.
We've got kind of two pieces here. The link, Semantic Link is kind of the base library that you start with, and Labs is kind of the outgrowth of that and kind of the evolution of it. So you can go ahead and go through the rest of the year.
Yeah, so so these are the semantic link is installed by default, and like as Gary mentioned, it's based on the Python library SymPy. Semantic Link Labs allows you access to those fabric items like reports, models, and that wrapper around the Power BI and Fabric APIs. It's not supported, but it's very community driven. We have to install it each time you run a session, or you can create an environment and so that it's installed all full time. But you'll see that we'll just install it each time we need to use it. It's very actively being developed. There are over, I think, 300 of these functions, and that extend the SymPy library.
Well, just a second. In terms of maybe the key differentiator here, the semantic link again is something that Microsoft put together really to allow, Gary mentioned kind of the data science workloads, really to allow kind of data level understanding of semantic models. If you think about, in an organization, you put together a semantic model that describes your business area, maybe a sales model or a finance model, something like that. You put a lot of work into building out those measures and structuring the data in that nice kind of star schema model. The semantic link was an effort to allow data scientists to basically kind of query that data and work with it so that they could take advantage of that. So a lot of the kind of the base library is about being able to interact with a model and maybe as a data scientist rather, kind of pull data out and use it for various workloads. The Link Labs extension of that goes a step further and gets into more of the metadata aspects of your model and being able to update and manage and do a lot of things. We'll talk about more here in a moment in terms of some of the use cases, but that's maybe kind of where the dividing line is. Again, the semantic link part comes kind of out of the box when you start up a notebook in Fabric. We'll show you what that looks like in a minute. The other one, the Link Labs component needs to be installed, but it's really just a line or two of code and you're ready to go. So,
okay. Again, they provide wrapper functions. They use open source Python libraries, and all of this is available in a notebook. So you're doing all of your work from a notebook, and you'll have all the advantages of working in that one notebook. You can even you can add a workbook to a pipeline and that sort of thing. So in order to execute some things, so you have all those advantages. So we're going to turn our attention to focus pretty much the rest of the session on Semantic Link Labs. It provides some really nice kind of features that I'll dive into, and we're talking about here. Enables you to automate essential tasks like refreshing, backing up, restoring, and even migrating semantic models across different workspaces. So those are tasks that would be difficult to set up, or they would, take many steps.
Yeah, and maybe to further kind of illustrate what some of these can do, we mentioned that they can kind of provide a wrapper to some of the APIs. So an API might give you information like return a list of all the workspaces, or show me a list of all the reports in a workspace, or something to that effect. And there are some simple endpoints here in Semantic Link Labs that replicate that kind of functionality. But the ones that are the most powerful are where they've really kind of obfuscated a lot of additional work that goes on behind the scenes. So we've got some endpoints that will not only pull back information, but automate the process of building a report around it. We'll show you how you do that. Maybe there's an endpoint that will not only pull back some of the metadata, but automatically write it to a lakehouse structure in your workspace environment. All things that, again, you could do on your own in, by connecting to an API and then maybe iterating through a bunch of stuff and pulling out. And we're not going to get into the code behind, but again, it may wrap what might be 200 lines of code to kind of iterate through everything and create this into a single function that really streamlines, that makes it a lot easier for you. So again, it kind of straddles a line between what we'd call really coding, and again, it is in Python, versus almost more of a scripting kind of approach because of how simple the functions can make it.
And you can run things like the Vertipack analyzer and the best practice analyzer from a notebook. And I think you're going to
show off some of that.
We're going to show off a little spoiler alert. So, and you can manage reports, all aspects of reports. You can modify visuals, pages, filters. You can audit your reports. So these are all some of the features, and many features. I think we've already kind of mentioned quite a few of these use cases. So
actually, do we want to bounce back to that last slide? I'm not sure. Did we walk through all those?
Oh, you can do deployment automation.
So where a lot of the power in a lot of this comes in is just the ability to do it in bulk, right? I mean, you can modify. It's not hard to modify a Power BI report using the built-in tools, either in Power BI desktop or even through the web interface now. But to be able to do it kind of across 15 reports at a time, we're going to show off a demo or how if we change a name in a workspace, or in a data set rather, and you have a bunch of attached reports that would then need to be updated. You could do that kind of in bulk across the board. You could, again, apply various governance kind of rules across the board, across multiple workspaces, or even in your entire environment, and then be able to gather information across an entire tenant, maybe list all your workspaces so you have an idea of where different data sets go. You could get into the details of things like, and I'm sure this is fairly common, as we talked about, when you have these kind of expansive Power BI environments that people have kind of gone off and done a lot of their own things. But we find a lot of times we get into these environments and this, kind of this foundational notion that we have in business intelligence about kind of a single source of the truth, right? Well, that may have been true at one point, but now you've got 14 different versions of your sales report kind of floating around because people have gone and got it on their own or made different changes, and now you've got. So to be able to kind of get your arms around where all that's coming from, you could do full lineage all the way back and see all of the different data sets and various reports that are tied to maybe your data warehouse, for example, and start to maybe provide some consolidation around that. And if nothing else, start with getting some reporting around it so you have a sense for where all that's coming from. So again, the automation component and kind of the broad aspects of it is what I think really makes this potentially interesting and useful for various admin kind of applications.
So, sorry, if
Yeah.
if I understood correctly, if a source column name change.
Yeah, we're gonna show a demo of how if we change the name of a column, and I'm sure you guys have seen this before, right? You change the name of a column, and then the report that was attached to it, next time you pull it up, it's got that big X on it and says the report's broken. That could be particularly troublesome if you've got 15 different reports all tied to a data set, right? Or different pages across it to be able to propagate that. So one of the things you can do here is one of the endpoints allows you to actually get access to kind of the report JSON. You know, it's essentially, if you've ever looked at one, you can actually get to see kind of behind the scenes. It spells everything out. So it kind of does a find and replace across all the attached reports and goes and updates the name from A to B and can stitch your reports together and allow them to work again. So that's one of the things we're going to demo here in a bit.
So it's like script modifying a bin file.
Yeah, just kind of like that. Yeah. Mhm.
It's already 12:30, so.
Oh, okay. We got time. I mean,
Okay. Um,
anything else in here that we want to touch?
the. We'll show example. I'll show an example here how you can copy a report. So you can go from like let's say you had a dev to prod. You wanted to use it for some sort of, tracking your deployment. You can rebind the report to a different data set. So when you can move it, you could be doing development in a test on a test data set and then move it to your prod. Once your testing is done, move it to a prod workspace and then connect and then rebind it to that the production semantic model.
I love the last.
The recover reports that have been, yeah, so that's something that I don't think we're gonna have a chance to demo that, but that, I'm sure you guys have all run into that, right? Where you try to download a data set and it says, oh, you can't do it because, there's a handful of reasons why Power BI will turn off that functionality for you. So there is a way to kind of use these tools to kind of cheat and go back, and essentially it involves, well, from a report perspective, it involves what we just touched on. You kind of extract the JSON and kind of reconstitute a report that points to it. And you could even do the same for the data set, the underlying data set. I think you can kind of export a kind of an empty version though of the model. I mean, one of the reasons they turn that off, if you get a model that's too big, you just can't download it because it becomes problematic. But essentially, you kind of extract the definition of the data set and be able to kind of reconstitute a version of that for the desktop. So that is we definitely wanted to talk about that. Again, I don't think we're going to get a chance to demo it, but that's I think a powerful use case.
So one of the couple of nice things about this is that, if you've ever accessed the APIs, there's the setting up your API call and all the authentication, and it can be a little bit tedious. Well, these don't require that. So you're just making function, that's sort of embedded in there or automated. And like Gary mentioned earlier, it reduces your need to know the APIs really clearly and like have a lot of Python knowledge between, the wrappers and these wrapper functions and Copilot or some sort of some kind of AI. You can pretty easily and quickly develop what you need to.
Yeah, Gary originally titled this slide "Easy to Use," and then we kind of thought it would like easier to use. It's not. I mean, there's still a little bit of knowledge involved here, but I think as you see some of the examples we're going to throw out, we're running lines of code and not blocks of code, right? And it's pretty simple. And again, for the versus the API, and I mentioned some of this earlier. In some cases, it's just a straight wrapper of a call that you can already make to an API, and this still makes it much simpler because you don't have to worry about API headers and authentication tokens and all that kind of mess that you typically have to kind of set up first. It's built into your notebook, so it already knows who you are and authenticates that way. And then, of course, you've got the more complicated ones where it does obfuscate a much bigger set of kind of instructions or code that are going on, where it's iterating through a bunch of stuff and maybe writing stuff to a data lake and things like that. So it does greatly simplify a lot of these kind of admin kind of actions that we're talked about.
So you have to have a fabric capacity. For Semantic Link Labs, you have to install the library.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How many people have a Fabric capacity right now? Or maybe a Power BI premium capacity, which is essentially now the same thing as a Fabric capacity, whether you realize that or not. Okay, so that is, again, kind of the baseline, and you need to have a Fabric capacity. All of your workspaces do not have to be assigned to that Fabric capacity, but you need to have a Fabric capacity with at least a workspace assigned to that capacity, so that you can create the notebooks that we're going to show off here in a moment and be able to run. And that Fabric capacity can be pretty small. The lowest level of Fabric capacity is what they call an F2 capacity, and those start at a few $100s a month. Of course, you can scale that up to whatever you need to, but you could get started with what we're showing you today with as little. In fact, you could get started on it with a Fabric trial capacity, which I'm sure they're still kind of hounding you about in Power BI. If you're interested, you click that little button up in the top right to start a free Fabric trial and get started with it that way as well. But that's step one. I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead.
That's okay. You also have to, as we mentioned, you have to install the library. You have to have access to, obviously, to your whatever data source connections you're trying to reach, and you have to have permissions. You're only going to be able to get to the workspaces and Fabric items that you have permissions.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of you here have the Fabric administrator role. It's kind of the global admin role in your environment. It's not a requirement here, but as Gary said, if you don't have that, then you'll be limited in terms of what you can see to just what workspaces you have access to. So again, all you really have to have is that Fabric capacity and at least access to a workspace to be able to kind of start playing with this. But it does become quite a bit more useful and powerful if you've got a more global access involved or set up.
Okay, so as I said, we're going to do a couple of demos here. We'll begin with the scenario where we want to copy a report from one workspace to another. I kind of mentioned that kind of dev to prod scenario. There could be other applications for this, and then we want to rebind that report. And there's a couple of different functions that we can use to do that. They are the custom. I'm drawing a blank here. Once I get once I get it opened up, but there's a couple of functions we'll use. Clone the report. Clone the report allows you to copy a report from one workspace to another. It also allows you to rebind that report all in one step if you want to. And then there's another function that allows you to rebind the report. We're going to get to that here in a second.
I'll let you go into whatever workspace you need there.
Okay. I get over.
Did I hide the bar over there on the side?
What's going on here?
Sorry, I went full screen. Did I?
Oh, there it is.
It goes.
Workspaces.
Down there lower.
Oh, okay. So here's our scenario. We've got.
Did you share those demo ones that you put together?
I guess not. That's unfortunate.
Here, make it into real quick.
Okay.
Hold on, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
You call me demo something.
Demo dev and demo prod. There.
Hey. There we go.
There we go.
Where you want to start?
Demo dev.
Okay.
So we can see that we have in our demo dev workspace, we have at the top, we have our notebook that we're going to use. And we have a food sales report connected to a food sales semantic link, our semantic model. And then over in our prod workspace, delete this one. We just have a food sales, what would be our food sales semantic model. Let's go back to the dev workspace and open up the notebook.
So notebooks are how you get started in these. And again, notebooks only light up when you have a fabric capacity assigned to your workspace. Once you do that, you click the new item button up in the top right. You get the ability to, in fact, why don't you go back out to the workspace real quick?
Sure.
For those that haven't played with fabric yet. You click that new item. In fact, I think you'll even see this now on a regular Power BI workspace. And if you try to create any of these objects that are fabric specific objects, then it'll prompt you at that point that you don't have a capacity. But this is how you get a whole variety of different artifacts that are available to you once you turn on the fabric capacity. The notebook is what we're concerned with right now. And yeah, those are pretty dead simple to set up. You select it here and you give it a name, and then off you go to a kind of a blank notebook. But you can go ahead and open up the one you already have kind of built out.
Okay. So before we begin with the demo, you need to install the library. So that installs the the functionality to run this demo.
And that's specifically the Link Labs library that we talked about. So as we mentioned, the semantic link itself is what they call a SemPy library that's already built into these. You don't have to install anything, but if you want to use the labs libraries here, you just have to run this little line of code that installs it. So when we talk about installing something, it's not installing in the sense of a desktop application or anything. It's just a line of code in a Python notebook that sets that up. So, and what's going on behind the scenes now is you start that. The first thing it does when you open up a notebook is it spins up a Spark session for you, kind of on demand. So you typically have to wait 10 or 15 seconds for a Spark session to come online, and then it starts running the script, and it takes another 15 or 20 seconds typically to install the library.
And the library, and this is installed for the life of this session.
Right? Yeah. So it's something you have to run pretty much every time.
Then you want to import some libraries that you need to run the two commands that we're going to work. That we're going to use, the clone report and the report rebind.
Yeah, so this little example talks about, again, just kind of taking a report from workspace one, from our dev workspace, and pushing it out to the prod workspace, and then we're going to bind it to a different data set once we get it over there.
Yeah. So in each one of these within the notebook, each one of these kind of blocks are called a cell. So this first cell we used to run the installation. The second cell we used to import the libraries. And now we're in the third cell where we've got, and you can run these cells one at a time, or you can run them.
I'm very familiar with notebooks. I mean, some of you guys that work with Python are familiar with them, I'm sure. You can use notebooks now to run SQL commands, for example, even if you wanted to do that. But it's the same thing here. You can document them. There's some documentation components, or you can have kind of documentation or text blocks in here as well. So they're kind of useful.
So kind of walking through this code here, I'm setting some variables. Really, you only need to set up the name, so you don't even have to go out and find an ID. One of the nice features of this is that these semantic link labs is that we don't have to go searching around for IDs. You can use a name of a report, a name of a workspace, so it's very user friendly that way. We just need our source report workspace. the clone report name and the target report space name.
That's a great, excuse me, that's a great point in terms of the simplicity here, right? Because if you use the underlying APIs, they ask you to pull in the GUID value for all these things. You got to figure out how to find those things in either the portal or look them up yourself. So just another way we kind of obfuscate some of the complexity, I think, if you working with the underlying API code.
Is this similar to how like Terraform works with automating, renaming, and reconfiguration, and then also similar to the Fabric deployment pipeline?
Well, this scenario here would be something that you could automate through a deployment pipeline. If you have a deployment pipeline set up, and if you played with those, you can set up so they automatically kind of rebind. I imagine they're probably using some of the same endpoints that we're going to use here. So, yeah, this in this case, this example would only be necessary if you didn't have a deployment pipeline, or we're just going to rebind a single report here. Again, I think this becomes more useful. This approach maybe becomes more useful if you wanted to rebind a variety of reports. If you've got, again, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you've got 15 or 20 reports all tied to a data set, and you've made some changes to your, maybe some fundamental changes to your data set. You want to see what's going to happen to all your reports. You can just rebind those reports, or maybe you make a copy of a bunch of those reports and rebind a big set. So there's an endpoint here that will actually sign. You just accept a data set and say update all of the, or rebind all of the data, or the reports rather, that were tied to this data set to this new data set. So again, when you can do it more in bulk across a variety of workspaces, a variety of reports, that's where I think some of this really kind of starts to become pretty interesting and valuable.
So we've commented out a couple of things in this code. That would allow you to rebind the report just using this one function. So this would move and rebind the report. We commented those out because, well, we want to show a separate. We want to use a separate function to do that. There's a report rebind that we're going to show in here in a second. But then, so you just pass those parameters in to the clone report function, and with a click of a button, and this should only take a few seconds. You've got this will now move your report over from the demo dev workspace to the demo prod workspace.
That's a reference to the library.
That's a reference to the library, and then clone report is the function.
Yeah, so that's just the first example of one of these functions in Link Labs that is kind of automating a lot of this for us, right?
We imported the REP up here in a previous cell, so it's not. Yeah, that's a good question. It wasn't visible.
Yeah, we'll jump into some of the documentation in a minute just to show off some of the various endpoints. But yeah, the clone report is doing the work here. That's the function call.
Now, what you did in this first cell here, you replicated the report in a different workspace, but it's still pointing to the dev data set. And the next cell, you're going to rebind it to the prod data set.
That's correct.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's exactly what I'd like to.
As long as they have the same schema, everything should be fine. But if there's any differences in the schema, then you could have some.
Well, yeah, if there are, I would say any difference in the schema, but if the schema is different enough that based on what the report is, yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah. In this case, I think the example is we've just got kind of two versions of the same data set. Maybe have different data, but the schema is the same. Correct.
So we now see the food. We're now in the demo prod workspace, and we see the food sales report. And if we click this button up here, the lineage, we get to see the lineage view of this, and you'll see exactly what you just said, that the food sales report is still bound to the demo dev semantic model. And again, if we wanted to, we could have used clone report to rebind it all in one step, but we're just going to, I wanted to show you how you could do a separate function, use a separate function just to rebind. So let's go back to our notebook. And this time we're going to call the report rebind function. I've set a few variables here up here. Very simple. Again, you can use report names and workspace names and data set names, and then you make this call, the report rebind function call. And when we run that, we can go back to the demo prod workspace. And we'll refresh. How do I refresh this?
It's already worked.
Well, it's kind of, yeah, it looks funny, but this will go away if we. Yeah.
This thing out.
So now we see that the food sales report has been bound to the semantic model in this workspace.
Iteratively go through and rebind all reports in a workspace to the respective environments data set.
Yeah, now you're
That's
thinking,
amazing for
yeah.
report development, because a lot of report devs, like, they forget to do it. So then you end up like some UAT reports are pointing at fraud data and some, so yeah, that's super useful.
Yeah, I'll show off here in a minute how we can actually do some of those looping kind of things. I mean, now in the case that you're suggesting that, well, maybe your scenario is a little bit different. As I said, there is an endpoint that will just point to a specific data set and say, find all the reports that are tied to this data set, and then change them all to go to this other data set. So that's one way to do it. But you can absolutely inventory your workspace and say, show me which ones are pointed to UAT and which ones are pointed to dev or prod, that kind of thing. And maybe even, have some kind of alert saying, hey, we've got data sets in the UAT workspace that are still pointed to dev, or vice versa, something like that.
And how granularly do the functions go? Like, can you see the lineage of a single column using this, like within a report?
That I think might even be more on the semantic links. I think you can get to some of that kind of in the base thing. There are a couple different ways to do it. We'll get into. I'll show off some of the documentation where you can kind of look at some of the different options here in a minute. There, as Gary said, there are 300 something odd endpoints. So there's typically a way to do just about anything that you can think of. Different ways to go about it. I mean, I don't think it would get down. Well, at the column level, I think you could get to the table level and figure out which table is coming from which data sources. And then from there, yeah, I think that's probably the level of granularity. So you want to,
Yeah, so now Gary's
we're
gonna,
gonna tag team here.
Gary's gonna dive in a little deeper.
Just remembering, I think I forgot to reset a few of my demos, so I'll play around with these a little bit. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about more of a governance scenario here. We start off with something simple about kind of rebinding a report as an example. I'm going to jump down to a workbook that I have out here that takes us through an example of how we would go about kind of analyzing a semantic model. And again, you imagine you could potentially do this at scale as well. And then try to correct a few problems. So as somebody already asked about the kind of changing a name. So we're gonna show off that as an example where you change a name and update some reports. But has anyone ever run across or used the best practice analyzer? It's a tool that originally kind of initiated in the tabular editor tool. If you guys are familiar with tabular editor for Power BI, they came up with this concept of a best practice analyzer that kind of navigates through the definition of a semantic model. And as kind of the name suggests, it looks for at a series of rules and to see if your semantic model is kind of up to snuff. And so we have an endpoint here that kind of can automate the running of that best practice analyzer. And so I want to show that. So again, I'm just starting up a notebook. I'm doing that same step that Gary showed where you got to install that Link Labs library real quick. We're going to import a few things. But just to show off a few other things that we can do here. Again, this is a really simple workspace or rather a very simple call here that's just going to list all of the workspaces in my environment. So I can run that. It exports everything here. We should have said earlier as a data frame in Python. For those of you familiar with Python data frames, it's kind of like a temporary table, if you want to think of it that way. And so you get kind of the output here. You can kind of see all the different workspaces, et cetera. So as we think about applications for just getting a catalog or of everything that's out there, this is not something that natively in Power BI is easy to do. There is in the admin portal, there's a list of all the workspaces, but there's not an easy way to kind of export that or do anything with it. We've got some notebooks that'll generate kind of a full lineage of your Power BI tenant, where you can get all of your workspaces and reports and data sets and understand kind of how they're all stitched together, is one of the things that you can kind of begin to accomplish with some of these endpoints. But as I mentioned a moment ago, there's this concept of a best practice analyzer. What they just have abbreviated here is just a BPA. So that we've got an endpoint here called run model BPA. We just give it a data set and a workspace, and we run that on an individual basis here. And after about 10 or 15 seconds, it comes back and it goes through all the rules that are set up and outputs. I think across four or five different categories here of potential violations of best practice. And so we're running this on a kind of an individual basis now. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these other scenarios here in a moment, but you can run it on a bulk basis. You see there's this other endpoint that'll run it in bulk. You can run it for an entire workspace or across specific workspaces or across every workspace. If you're really a glutton for punishment, you want to see how poorly all of your Power BI developers are operating. So what you get after you run that is you get across again these four categories. You see all the various violations or suggestions, I guess is probably a better way to put it. You see them, they categorize them a little differently, more of an informative versus a kind of a warning. And I guess these red X ones are some problems that should really be addressed. But just a kind of a catalog here of some of the things I want to clean up. You have the ability to customize these rules if you really wanted to. So we're not going to get into it here today, but if you wanted to change one of these rules or say, I really just don't care about this inactive relationships. But anyway, this would allow you, and again, the scenario here that I'm trying to kind of walk through would be more of a governance approach to your really enterprise level shared data models that are going to be used across workspaces. So before you deploy those, I think it's a good process to step through some of this and make sure that, whether it's a new model or as is probably more often the case that somebody's made a change to the model, it's probably a good idea to have some of these kind of rules in place just to make sure there's some consistency and some standards applied across the board. And doing it essentially kind of a code review, right, of a data model, and being able to automate it this way, I think is pretty powerful. And so you can imagine we're just running this on a single model now, but you could run this again across if you've got a kind of a production workspace, or if you've set up your deployment pipelines, as someone was asking earlier, you've got kind of a dev, test, prod. Maybe this is a step before you go from test to your prod workspace. You run this kind of an analysis and make sure that everything passes. So I want to get into a few specific scenarios here. So if we look through, and I don't want to go through all the various, this is just kind of a sample data set somewhere. And some of the stuff, frankly, that I think this thing balks on is fairly kind of tedious. But we've got, for example, all these objects that it's complaining that don't have descriptions. We've got all these columns on here without descriptions. The columns themselves, I'm not too worried about columns without descriptions, frankly, because I think most of them are fairly self-explanatory. Where this becomes really interesting, I think, to me, is if we scroll down, we get into the measures without descriptions. I think it's much more appropriate and useful to have descriptions on your measures. Measures are your DAX calculations that are calculating something. Your end users, when they see those, they just see that there's a discount percent greater than 20. They don't get to see the DAX that underlies that. Even if they did, a lot of them aren't going to understand the DAX necessarily. So to be able to provide a description in kind of plain English that this is, it comes from this table maybe, and it applies this kind of logic and maybe just a sentence or two about what it is and how it's being calculated, so that it's better understood. That's useful for not just your users, but for Copilot and AI as well. Is that what you're going to ask?
And actually, what we've been doing is we've been taking our JAX, throwing it in Copilot and saying, give me a 1 sentence description of this, and then use that to actually describe the measure within the model.
You're
Been
a couple steps ahead of me, but I'm going to show something similar here in a minute. But yeah, I think that's great. And so it's kind of a self-feeding loop, because one of the real benefits of being able to describe your DAX calculations is to feed into Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever it is, or I guess specifically Copilot in this case, so that when you turn on those Copilot uses, those AI kind of use cases, and point it to a model, maybe a little surprisingly, a Copilot does not do a really good job of really analyzing the DAX calculations themselves to be able to kind of solve problems. So if you can kind of describe for Copilot, and even in your case, right, have Copilot describe for you and then back into Copilot, it can do a much better job of understanding and being able to answer those questions. So that would be another a real powerful use case here, is kind of to prep these models for AI as we think about, kind of all the AI applications that we have now. In Power BI, we've had kind of this notion of synonyms. Has anybody played with synonyms in Power BI? That was kind of phase one of back when we had kind of pre-Copilot artificial intelligence, kind of that natural language query that was in there. It was important to get those synonyms. And those are still somewhat important as well. There's also now the concept of they call linguistic schema in your, if it sounds like you maybe somewhat familiar with that. That's also kind of allowing putting some metadata into your Power BI model about how the relationship between tables in a model work, so that it can be better understood in Copilot. So that would be an important use case here. So we've got all these measures. It's flagging these measures that don't have descriptions. And so what can we do about that? Let's jump down here to this. So the easiest way is, or the most straightforward here, I shouldn't say the easiest, the most straightforward is there's an endpoint here. Once we connect to our semantic model, and you kind of see we have this connect semantic model, we give it the name of the model and the workspace again. So we kind of read it into an object here. And then we're going to update a measure. So we've got all our measures in here. We're going to find the average discount measure, and we're going to give it a description. Now you're welcome to go through all these and manually type in a description for them. You're welcome to, I think that's a great use case there, is to pop them into ChatGPT or Copilot to generate those descriptions for you. As a way to generate or to kind of plop those in. You're certainly welcome to do some kind of an iterative kind of approach to these workspaces as well. So that's just as a simple command that's going to update it. They actually have an endpoint in here to generate those measure descriptions, and it does exactly what you talked about. It will feed them into Copilot. It'll feed all of those DAX calculations into Copilot, and it'll generate a description for you. And it can write those descriptions right back to the model itself.
So would you do that? Think of that, like if you would do that for every measure without a description?
The way and this is, I'm kind of calling it here open-ended. So I don't know what would it do if they already had a description, if it would overwrite that or it would leave it alone. That's a good question. You could probably, yeah. You could certainly either go through, right now it's going through every one of them, or you could probably loop through, find all the ones with no description or something like that. That is, you need to be a little careful there for consistency's sake, as you probably know when you put stuff into Copilot or ChatGPT, you get kind of different answers every time you run it. So it might come up with one description this time, and if you run it again, it could potentially alter that description a little bit. So you want to avoid that. But this is a good example of one that is doing much more than just calling an API call. I mean, you can imagine what that's doing behind the scenes. It's just doing a lot of what you described, right? It's finding all of the measures, it's looping through each one, it's pulling out the DAX calculation, it's feeding that into Copilot, it's getting the result from Copilot and pulling it back into, to probably an array that's then getting pushed back into the model itself and updating the model. And, I would, so the caveat here, and You guys may be aware, the Copilot features in Power BI have been up to this point kind of paywall behind an F64 SKU or higher in Fabric. They're in the process of changing that. They've just announced here about a month ago that they're going to bring all that Copilot functionality down to the lower SKUs, the F32s and below. It appears that we're in some kind of a transitionary period right now where this endpoint particularly didn't work when I tried to run it last night, and there's a couple of issues out in the GitHub repository for this that are trying to solve it. So, but presumably you'll be able to run this even on a smaller Fabric capacity here soon and be able to generate those descriptions out of the box. Yeah.
Just some clarification on I guess some words here. This is Fabric space.
So the terminology, I agree, is a little confusing, as is Microsoft's habit. Yeah. You've got a workspace, and this could be any kind of a workspace within Fabric/Power BI. It just needs to be assigned to the Fabric capacity. So it's the kind of the licensing model of a workspace. There are different ways you can license it. You can license it based on your pro license or your premium license. The terminology it would be assigned to a Fabric capacity. Yes, that's correct. Yep. It could be a trial capacity, as I said, so you could get started on this with a trial. But yeah. That is a semantic model in a Power BI data set, or in a Power BI workspace. So you can see there we've pointed to a workspace, which again is just kind of I think of it more as like a folder level structure, way to organize various objects in Fabric or Power BI. And you've got a data set, in our case, it's called Sales Dashboard, is the one we're looking at. But yeah, and those are obviously variables. You could point that to anything you want. Of course, you could iterate through various data sets and workspaces if you wanted to do that as well. So again, that would this command, if you run it, would apply it across. We had probably 40 or something measures in this model, and would go get descriptions for all of those, update them in the model, and off you go. So that could be obviously very powerful and very useful, again, for those Copilot kind of AI scenarios. Then the other one that I wanted to talk about was, let's say, in fact, if we jump back up here, you'll find that we have a few. I think I may have. I don't think I reset this, so it's you may not see them here. But one of the other things that it will complain about are naming convention formatting, right? So if we've got come on. I had a few measures in here that, there's a good example of one, right? So it says first letter of the objects must be capitalized. Again, this could be something you customize in terms of this standard naming convention for your measures. It didn't like that I have, lowercase t total underscore sales. So let's say we wanted to change that to capital T total, and then maybe it's total space sales instead. Just kind of a cleanup kind of task, fairly insignificant, but as you can imagine the implications of that, what you talked about earlier, right? If you've got a bunch of reports that are all referencing total underscore sales, and then you've changed it to total sales, everything's going to break, and now you've got kind of chaos on your hands. The only way to previously to fix that is have somebody to go into every one of those reports and go into edit mode and change this measure out and kind of swap it A to B. You can use the libraries here to go. First of all, we're going to go change the name in our model. And the way we do that, again, we kind of connect to our semantic model using that endpoint. We give it the name and the workspace, and then we tell it what we want to change. We're going to change in fact, I'm going to jump down here to this one, I think. So we're going to change total underscore sales, and we're going to call it total sales. It actually, the way it has to go about this is kind of a drop and replace approach. So we have to go and find the current measure. We grab all of its properties, its expressions, its format string, everything about it. We remove that measure from the current model, and then we add a new measure with the new name plus all of basically the attributes of the old one. So it's going to go through and it's going to drop total underscore sales. It's going to kind of recreate it as total sales is what it should do here.
Only work with Fabric objects, or could you use this with legacy semantic models like AAS?
Do you have an Azure Analysis Services instance deployed to Fabric or outside of? No, I don't think it will work outside of Fabric right now. I think that model would need to be in Fabric for these endpoints to work. So we've got, if I can run this with both reports. I have a couple sample Power BI reports, and I should have just broken both of them, I believe. There we go, broken. Is it going to show me both? I think it's only showing me that first one.
Yeah, so you can see here, you're still in your notebook and you're actually viewing the report from the notebook.
Yeah, this is kind of fun little, or just to launch a report, we just give the name of a report in the workspace and it pulls up the report itself. And if you see the details of this, it should probably tell me that it's looking for, does it say it's looking for total sales or not? It doesn't actually say that in here. But take my word for it. It's looking for total sales. And we've stripped that out and pull it away. So the next step would be to go and find all those reports. So I've got a little bit of code in here that's just going to go and find all the reports that are attached to this sales dashboard data set. And it should, not to really belabor the point or kind of walk through it too minutely here, but it just finds the various reports, it finds the various data sets, it kind of joins them together. That's what that merge is on the data set ID. And then it's going to pull back a list of the reports that are associated with it. And to show how, we talked about kind of iterating through this. So this is a good example here. We've got 3 reports and we're going to kind of iterate through each. And in this case, we're going to go and get the JSON. So it's going to, for each of the reports in that array of report names or list of report names, it's going to go and it's going to run this endpoint to get the report JSON and drop that into another array. And then as it runs that, the next step would just be to take that and we're going to do a find and replace. And this is actually the old one here. So let me change that to total sales. And we're going to call this. So again, it's kind of a find and replace approach here. So it's going to look for all the references to total underscore sales. And it's going to say, oh, now I'm calling this total sales. So we're going to swap that in instead. So it's modified all the JSON. And then the last step here would just be to kind of iterate through those again. And then we're going to update those reports and we're going to update it specifically from the report JSON. So we can actually take that JSON and you could do this to create reports, by the way, too. You could get JSON and create a whole new report from JSON if you have that or modify it somewhere. But in this case, we're just going to update that report. It's already there. We're just going to give it the new JSON that we've modified with that new name. And it should go through each of those and find any references to it and swap that out.
Theoretically, create your own function that would do all of that in a chain, right?
You could, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this isn't a lot of code, but yeah, you could certainly obfuscate that further and create a function. Yeah, it would just fed in the handful of variables you needed and did that. Yeah. So now let's run our report again and see if that fixed it. Oh, look at that. Super simple report, but there, yeah. So we swapped it out. Now instead of using the total underscore sales, it's using total sales. Again, imagine how you could do that across a much wider. I think this, these kind of scenarios are one of the things that have always kind of kept us from maybe implementing some of our best practices, right? Hey, I know I probably should have called that something else, but boy, it's going to be such a real pain in the ass to have to go through and fix 20 different reports. But if I can do that with a couple snaps and a couple lines of code, it becomes much more tenable. I can clean these models up and make them a little more best practice focused, if I will. It's it's like a plant here. He's asking all the questions like 2 steps before I get to him. Yeah, I'm going to show you some. We're going to do that here in just a second. Uh, but yeah, to hold that thought for just a second, because I wanted to circle back to being able to kind of store this somewhere. So I mentioned earlier that we ran that best practice analyzer for an individual model. We can run it for an entire workspace. In this case, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other. The benefit though to this bulk command is that it automatically not just runs that best practice analyzer, but it stores the results in a table in our lakehouse. So we've got just a sample lakehouse is another object that you can create in a Fabric workspace. It's you think of it as a little data warehouse. It's basically exposed as kind of like a SQL table here in a minute. So it will automatically create that table for us. And then we also have some built-in endpoints, and this is what's really cool. And to kind of hammer home some of the point of how streamlined some of this can make it. It then turns around and creates a semantic model based on that table, and builds that out for you because it's got the Debian understands the structure of that table, of course. And then further, it's even got an endpoint that will turn around and build an automatic report. So it's 3 lines of code here, and I haven't see how long this takes to run. Well, that's an interesting point. So I said this is it kind of grew out of that original Python library. A guy named Michael Kowalski.
Kowalski, yeah.
I think is he a Microsoft MVP or a Microsoft employee? Yeah,
But this is not endorsed.
it's endorsed. It's not officially supported. Yeah, so and what's cool about this is that now you could potentially get some kind of telemetry on it too, right? You could run this every time you deploy it. So now you've got a snapshot of what the model looked like every time you deployed it, and you can kind of trend that over time, or say, well, the last time we deployed it, we only had 4 measures without descriptions, and now we've ballooned out to 20 or something for whatever reason. It's going to put it in, I'll show you in a moment. It's going to put it in a single table in the lakehouse, but you'll get, it puts a timestamp on it. So you'll get a bunch of records that'll have a timestamp of today. And then if you ran again tomorrow, you'll get, just add to it, it'll append to it. So you can kind of see it's doing a bunch of stuff, and I'll show you what that looks like here in our workspace. So I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly right. So it creates this one little table over here called model BPA results. You'll see kind of what it looks like here in a second. It combines all 4 of those categories really just into one big table here. So you kind of see the raw data, but it shows all the workspace and the data sets and the, blah, blah, blah. Here's your warning and column and what, so it's got all that data that was behind that. Here's the timestamp. So you'll just kind of append to that as we go. In fact, some of these are probably from yesterday when I was playing with it. Yeah, it looks like it. And then in addition to that, let's see, I might have to refresh to see the other. That's a great question. We talked about automated, so you can schedule them to run on a regular basis if you wanted to do that. Just like a Power BI data set refresh, you can say run this every night at midnight. You could also integrate it into a Fabric pipeline. If you wanted to make it part of a bigger kind of ETL process that runs every night or something like that, and then these things transform data. So we should see 2 things here. We should see a semantic model. Where'd the semantic model go? Oh, there it is down there. So model BPA, semantic model integrated this model BPA report. And so again, it did all that from one line. Well, each of those were 1 line of code. It creates this out of the box Power BI report that you can view as well. So you can do that, and then the other one to kind of answer the question you had there a moment ago was around kind of the stats on the on the model itself. So we've got kind of your best practice analyzer, and then we also have this thing called a Vertipack analyzer, and this really starts to take a look at the performance of your model and kind of implementing some best practice. I guess it doesn't give you the recommendations around best practices, but we'll start to illustrate your high cardinality columns that are a problem in Power BI if you have them there, certainly for unnecessarily, or the ones that are taking up the bulk of the space in your model. You'll see that here in a second once this kind of I imagine that's a good question, how it's gathering that some of that. It may pull some of that from like your XMLA endpoints where you can pull. I think that's kind of maybe how it would have to get to some of this behind the scenes. Well, in fact, I've already got one. I think I ran it for this last night. The stats should still be in here somewhere. So you get this little summary view, right? So we've got the sales dash, the total size is, I think that's in kilobytes. This is just 3.4 megabytes, but it lists out all the tables. You can see the row counts and the size, and this would be where you'd get a sense for how big each of your tables are, what's consuming most of the space in your model. If anyone's ever had to deal with large models and trying to figure out how to trim them down and keep them smaller, this is the great kind of information. And I think this one, maybe even more so than the best practice analyzer, would be really interesting to trend over time. And so you kind of do the same thing here. You can create this information. You can also, there's also an endpoint here that will write that into a series of tables in. So here, this one we'll take it, point to that data set workspace, and export it to tables. So I think we'll run that one here in a second. I don't think they have an endpoint here that does quite the same so it creates these tables. I don't think it creates, I think there's one that automatically creates a semantic model or creates a report for this one yet.
I think so.
But I wouldn't be surprised if something like that's coming. I said this library is not only fairly new, but it's also being very actively developed. So they're adding to this all the time. It's community driven. That Microsoft guy that we talked about kind of owns it or runs it, but these things are coming online all the time. So once you run this, after a few moments, we'll update our Lakehouse view again, and you should see another 7 or 8 tables get created that have the contents of all the stuff we saw up here a moment ago. So again, this could be something that you use to just to kind of keep track and keep tabs on your model over time. You just see how much it's growing in terms of let's say the row count on your fact sales table. Presumably will get a little larger every day, but it could also be used to put some alerts in place to make sure that it doesn't double in size overnight. That might be a red flag if you saw something along those lines.
Or if you had an performance issue on a data set and you were wanting to troubleshoot this, you might use this.
Yeah, and it'd be great to know, right? Why was it working fine yesterday and not today? If you could see stats on the underlying data like this, that could be potentially very useful as well. Yeah, so it wrote to our Lakehouse again. Let's see if we can update that.
Does the same thing. Creates the data frame, writes the table, creates the data set, and creates a report.
Well, so it does not, we do not have endpoints here yet to do a semantic model or a report right out via code. It does create the Lakehouse objects. You see all these Vertipack analyzer tables, these 6 tables here get created. But you'd have to create your own model and own report on this for the time being. Yeah. So anyway, so it automates all that for you. It does drop them here into a table structure. It's kind of the same thing. You get a stamp on these, so you can continue to append to these over time and kind of see how they change. I know we're kind of running just about out of time here already. There were a few other things that we wanted to touch on. So maybe I'll just kind of mention a few that we wanted to kind of briefly say. We talked briefly about automating or writing a notebook to refresh data models. You can certainly do that. There's an endpoint that'll just do something as pointing to a data set and running a refresh. But where it really gets more interesting is you can get much more targeted. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at advanced scenarios around some of your incremental refresh kind of setups, but you can also create partitions in a workspace, or I'm sorry, in a data set, and or even go further than that. Take a model that has a variety of tables. You can refresh individual tables within a model, which is not something Power BI itself lets you do. So if you've got a big model that's taking too long to refresh, there's some interesting scenarios or applications here where you can get much more targeted in terms of the refresh schedule. Would be one other potential use case. Was there something else? I think there were a couple others that we would potentially talked about, but anyway, so really what we wanted to kind of go through is just kind of scratch the surface on what's out there. I guess we didn't talk about the documentation, but there's that's something to it, you know. Yeah, I understand it. We're kind of running out of time. So if you guys need to jump out, but the documentation is great. You get in here and you get to this labs package, and you can see, again, these are all the various endpoints that you have access to. So a lot of times it's just kind of searching through that list to try to find a way to do what it is you may want to do. So again, I just hope to kind of expose you to this, let you know what's out there, what's possible, and hopefully get your brain kind of working on some interesting ideas that might help solve some problems in your organization.
If you're interested in getting started, there's that Michael Kowalski has built a GitHub site for this. In that GitHub site, he has a notebook that installs a whole bunch of sample notebooks into a workspace of your choice, and you can really get moving quickly on this stuff.
Yeah,
and
so
that's
a great point. Yeah. It is meant to be tightly integrated with Fabric because of the authentication piece. So that's the part that I'm not sure how it would work if you had it outside of Fabric. I haven't tried that myself. You're welcome to give it a shot. I mean, I think you could install the libraries, but my guess is you'd run into some authentication problems there along the way, potentially.
You probably have you have to get bearer token.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the real benefits of this thing is it obfuscates all that stuff for you. You don't have to really worry about it. So yeah, I'm not sure how if there's even endpoints that would allow you to feed some of that kind of stuff in, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I mean, again, you saw the one example kind of modified the JSON. So if you understood the JSON structure and wanted to, I mean, if you had a block of code that created a bar chart, for example, and wanted to kind of insert that into a report at a specific, I imagine you could probably accomplish something like that. Yeah. I think you were going to say something about themes.
Yeah, you can apply themes,
Yeah.
but that's a little bit more low tech, but yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, you've got access to the underlying JSON definition of a report. So whatever you can kind of think of in that regard, you could potentially do. Yeah. So, yeah, you have a question? Yeah, you can absolutely run PowerShell. In fact, there is a series of PowerShell commandlets that will that kind of serve a similar purpose to some of these things, where they kind of provide kind of a wrapper to a subset of the Power BI APIs. I would say they're not. Some of them are certainly very useful. There's just not the breadth of stuff that you get in this, but you can absolutely use PowerShell. It does, but I wouldn't say that that's at the expense necessarily of PowerShell. I think it kind of has its place. I do think that that they're kind of pushing the notebooks only because they're kind of a native component of a Fabric workspace, so it's a little bit cleaner. But I've used those Power BI commandlets a number of times. They're still being actively maintained and developed. So there's absolutely a use case for something like that. I've just used them recently for a project where we're kind of migrating from one tenant to another. So we kind of use them to export a whole bunch of reports and then import them somewhere else. So yeah.
You guys said this mostly.
I think it's fair to say. It's it's still called Semantic Link Labs, but I think as you see, it's expanded beyond just semantic models. It's kind of you can access reports and now I don't think there are any endpoints that allow you to actually interact with some of the more Fabric, like a notebook itself, for example. I don't think you can access those or maybe even I think there may be some stuff on the lake houses now. You can do some interaction with the lake house, but it certainly grew out of the ability to interact with a semantic model itself. And as I said, the base library really focuses more on the ability to kind of query it and provide some of the metadata, lineage, and those kind of things. What's that?
Interact with other Fabric objects.
Yeah, in some cases, yeah. All right. Anything else? Sorry to keep you guys a few minutes over. I'm sure there's probably plenty of food left. But thanks for your time today. And we'll make these slides available to Julie and she'll put them out on the website. I'm sure if anybody care to see them, if you guys ever have any questions, reach out. Be happy to help. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Back to analyze.